In today's episode, we look at 5 brutal safari attacks, from a Nile crocodile dragging a woman beneath the Chobe River to a hippo's bone-crushing blow on Zimbabwe's lower Zambezi. But first, we begin on a private game reserve in South Africa at dusk, where we witness the last moments of Thessaly Vankamp being eaten alive during her safari. It was July 19th, 2016, and dusk was settling across a private game reserve in northeastern South Africa. The light had dropped quickly, the way it does in the dry winter months, and the scrubland had gone from gold to gray in the span of 20 minutes. Thessaly Vankamp was a 28-year-old Instagram influencer from Cape Town, whose online presence centered on fitness modeling and adventure travel. Her account had accumulated roughly 6,000 followers, small but growing. Vankamp had arrived at the lodge 2 days earlier, already posting complaints about mandatory distance requirements that prevented her from capturing the dramatic close-up wildlife shots she needed. The evening game drive departed at 5:45 p.m. with 6 passengers. The guide conducted the standard safety briefing, emphasizing that passengers must remain seated and that approaching predators on foot was strictly prohibited. Each participant signed the lodge's formal liability waiver prior to departure. The vehicle located a spotted hyena clan 40 minutes into the drive. Roughly a dozen hyenas were feeding on an impala carcass in open scrubland, visible in the headlights at the edge of the track. The guide positioned the vehicle at a safe observation distance and cut the engine. The sounds of the feeding clan carried clearly across the still evening air, crunching, tearing, the occasional low whoop rising and falling in the dark. Vankamp immediately expressed dissatisfaction, stating her camera required closer proximity for usable shots in the low light. The guide refused, explaining that active feeding made the clan unpredictable and that the fading light made any approach on foot extremely dangerous. Vankamp argued she had done similar approaches on other reserves. The guide maintained his position. In the minutes that followed, 2 passengers on the left side began asking the guide about a second group of hyenas moving in from the north. While he turned to address them, Vankamp slipped over the right side panel and dropped to the ground. Another passenger shouted. By the time the guide turned back, she had already covered 6 to 8 yards toward the carcass. He ordered her to stop and return immediately. She continued forward, crouching low, camera raised. Spotted hyenas are among Africa's most successful large carnivores, with adult females weighing between 120 and 180 pounds and possessing some of the most powerful jaws of any land predator. Their massive jaw muscles can crush bone and tear through hide with devastating efficiency. Hyenas are highly responsive to changes in silhouette and movement pattern. A crouched or fallen human presents a low profile and erratic motion that can trigger investigatory or predatory behavior, particularly near an active food source. Vankamp had closed to roughly 15 yards from the carcass, no more than 10 or 12 from the nearest feeding animal, crouching low in near total darkness. At that distance, in that posture, she no longer presented as a standing human. She was a low, unfamiliar shape moving erratically at the edge of a food source. The nearest hyena lifted off the kill. It didn't charge, it advanced, head low. In the distinctive testing approach hyenas use to evaluate unfamiliar movement near a food source. A second clan member rose from the carcass and oriented toward her. She froze briefly, then continued forward. At roughly 12 yards, she shifted her footing on uneven ground and stumbled, dropping to one knee. She was on the ground for only a moment, but that was enough. What followed was fast, but not instant. The investigating hyena closed the remaining distance and bit into her upper leg, a hard, exploratory grab that tore fabric and skin. Vankamp screamed and twisted sideways, falling fully onto the ground. That escalation, the scream, the fall, the sudden shift from low shape to thrashing movement changed the calculation. The second hyena committed. It came in from the flank and seized her lower leg. She was now flat, screaming, struggling to rise, and the clan's opportunistic instinct took over. Other individuals moved in, biting and releasing and biting again. Not coordinated, not a kill sequence, but chaotic and cumulative, each animal taking what it could. The sounds carried back to the vehicle before the guide had a clear line. He grabbed his rifle and fired a round into the dirt several feet from the nearest animal. Not into the air, but low, close enough to send debris scattering into the group. The clan flinched but did not fully disengage. A second shot into the ground, closer still. He gunned the engine and advanced the vehicle forward with spotlights on full, revving hard as he closed the distance. The combination of engine noise, headlights, and a third shot finally broke the clan's focus. The nearest animal scattered into the dark scrubland. Vankamp was alive when the guide reached her. She had sustained deep lacerations across her upper thigh, including a deep medial wound with catastrophic arterial bleeding. Blood loss was severe. She remained conscious for several minutes before losing consciousness. The guide applied direct pressure immediately. The vehicle's trauma kit was retrieved by a passenger and passed forward. The injury was a severe proximal femoral wound, too close to the pelvic junction for a limb tourniquet to achieve effective occlusion. Hemostatic packing was attempted, but the volume of blood loss before any compression could be established had already been catastrophic. There were no signs of life when the reserve's contracted emergency medical responder reached the scene. She was declared deceased before evacuation could be completed. Within 24 hours, the story had broken nationally across South African media. It was not Vankamp's following that drove coverage. At 18,000 followers, she was largely unknown outside Cape Town fitness circles. It was the screenshots, her posts from earlier in the trip complaining about distance rules and expressing frustration with the guides, time-stamped days before her death, circulated widely and gave the story a narrative that media outlets ran with. International outlets picked it up within 48 hours. Coverage peaked over 3 to 4 days before fading. The guide was placed on administrative leave during the subsequent investigation, standard procedure. Both the police inquiry and conservation authority review concluded no criminal negligence had occurred. The guide was reinstated. No charges were filed. The lodge voluntarily revised its evening drive procedures. While northeastern South Africa had witnessed an influencer's final post, the open savannas of Tanzania would soon demonstrate how quickly a walking safari can turn fatal the moment circumstances shift beyond anyone's control. It was March 8, 2015, and pre-dawn darkness was lifting across Tanzania's Serengeti ecosystem. A small walking safari group prepared to depart from a mobile camp positioned along a seasonal migration route. Corian Dwelman was a 34-year-old wildlife blogger from Utrecht, Netherlands, whose website documented conservation issues across East Africa. Dwelman had spent 3 weeks following the wildebeest migration. Her work focused on ground-level perspectives that vehicle-based safaris could not match. The group consisted of 6 participants, an armed professional guide, and a tracker. The briefing emphasized that participants must remain in a tight group, maintain silence, and follow instructions without hesitation. The group departed at 6:20 a.m., moving slowly through chest-high grass. Late-season growth had thickened the vegetation beyond typical density, reducing ground-level visibility to 20 yards or less in places. The guide chose a route skirting a dry riverbed, bordered by thick vegetation, terrain that offered good photographic vantage points but limited sight lines into surrounding cover. It was the kind of landscape where anything could be lying in the grass 20 feet away and remain completely invisible. Wind conditions that morning were variable, with gusts shifting direction unpredictably. 45 minutes in, the wind shifted and held. The guide recognized the danger immediately. They were now upwind of terrain they had just passed through. He raised his hand to halt and turned to scan behind them. The lioness emerged from the grass 20 yards back, body low, ears flat. 2 small cubs were visible behind her. The guide understood the situation in an instant. They had moved unknowingly close to a female with cubs, and the wind shift had delivered their scent. Dwelman, walking at the rear of the group, the position she had been assigned that morning, was the nearest figure. The guide raised his rifle. The lioness charged before he could find a safe angle. She came in a straight line directly through Dwelman's position, partially obscured by the chest-high grass, and any shot risked hitting her. The charge covered 20 yards in under 3 seconds. African lions are apex predators, weighing between 260 and 375 pounds for females. capable of speeds approaching 35 miles per hour over short distances. Their defensive kill centers on the throat, jaws clamping to occlude airflow until the threat is neutralized. Lions do not feed during or immediately after a defensive charge. The attack is about eliminating a perceived threat to cubs, not predation. The lioness struck Dwalman with full force, driving her backward off her feet and into the grass. She repositioned within seconds, clamping her jaws around Dwalman's throat. The guide still could not fire. Dwalman and the lioness were locked together, and the tracker was in the background. The tracker shouted and waved his arms, but the animal held. Dwalman's movement ceased within roughly a minute. The lioness held her grip briefly longer before releasing and stepping back. As the lioness turned toward her cubs, the guide fired a warning shot into the air. The animal disappeared into the grass. He approached immediately. Dwalman showed no signs of life. He and the tracker briefly attempted CPR, but the severity of the tracheal and cervical trauma made resuscitation impossible, and the attempt was abandoned within minutes. Emergency protocols were initiated via radio, but the remote location placed them over an hour from medical facilities. District medical personnel confirmed death upon arrival. Dwalman had followed every instruction she had been given. She had not broken formation, had not moved independently, had done nothing that separated her from the group. She had simply been at the back, the position assigned to her, when the wind shifted. The inquest ruled the death accidental, noting that the guide's route through terrain with limited visibility, combined with dense late-season grass and unpredictable wind, may have increased the group's risk exposure. The guide was suspended from walking safari duties, pending retraining. The operator's walking safari license was placed under review, pending revised protocols. The case received regional coverage and was discussed at an East African Professional Guides Conference the following year as a case study in environmental risk assessment. While Tanzania's grasslands had claimed a dedicated wildlife blogger, the border rivers of southern Africa would soon prove equally unforgiving for a consultant who underestimated what was already in the water. It was June 14, 2018, and the Chobe River moved sluggishly through the floodplain, marking the border between Botswana and Namibia. The dry season had reduced water levels significantly, exposing broad, sandy banks along both sides. Devora Schellings was a 39-year-old ecotourism consultant from Johannesburg whose firm advised safari lodges on sustainable practices. Her background included field research in wildlife management, and she often referenced her experience to justify confidence around dangerous animals. Schellings had conducted foot-based environmental surveys in shallow river systems during earlier research, wading through ankle and knee-deep water to collect samples and photograph bank erosion dozens of times without incident. Over the years, still, clear, shallow water had stopped registering as dangerous in her mind. It was a blind spot built from repeated safe exposure, not from ignorance. The afternoon boat excursion departed at 3:30 p.m. with 4 passengers. The operator conducted a safety briefing emphasizing that entering the water was strictly prohibited. The river supported large crocodile populations that remained active throughout the dry season. 90 minutes in, the operator maneuvered toward a sandy bank, where several large crocodiles had been basking. The reptiles slid into the water as the boat approached, unhurried, sliding off the bank one after another until the sand was empty. The operator positioned the boat at a safe distance from shore. Schellings stated she needed shoreline shots for client reports and pushed for a closer approach. The operator explained that crocodiles had just entered the exact area between the boat and the bank. Schellings dismissed the concern, stating the shallow water made an attack unlikely. The operator repeated his prohibition. As the operator repositioned, the engine stalled briefly in the shallows. While he leaned over the stern to restart it, Schellings moved quickly to the bow. It is unclear whether she interpreted the stalled engine and the resulting drift toward shore as an opportunity or as implicit permission, but she stepped off the bow and into the water before anyone could react. The water reached mid-thigh. She began wading toward the bank with her camera raised. The operator, having restarted the engine, shouted for her to return. She waved her hand without looking back. Nile crocodiles are Africa's largest freshwater predator, with mature males exceeding 16 feet and weighing over 1,600 pounds. They possess among the most powerful bites of any living animal. Their hunting strategy is built entirely on concealment and surprise. There is rarely any warning. The initial strike is a sudden surge from stillness, followed immediately by the death roll, a rapid spinning maneuver designed to disorient prey and pull it underwater. Once submerged and rolling, a victim loses all sense of direction almost immediately. The strike came without warning, a violent surge from the shallows that sent water erupting around her. Schellings was pulled off her feet immediately and submerged within seconds. She surfaced once, briefly, one arm visible above the water, before the rolling pulled her back under. The surface churned briefly, then went still. The operator gunned the engine toward the site. One passenger struck at the water with a paddle. The water returned to stillness. There was nothing to reach. Partial remains were recovered 2 days later, several hundred meters downstream, located after a report from local fishermen narrowed the search area. The investigation concluded Schellings had entered the water against explicit instructions in an area where crocodiles had been observed entering moments earlier. No criminal negligence was found. The inquest returned a finding of accidental death by misadventure. While Botswana's rivers had demonstrated the fatal consequences of overconfidence, the dense bush of Zambia would soon reveal how fast a disturbed leopard can move when it decides a threat is too close to ignore. It was September 22, 2014, and darkness had settled over the Luangwa Valley in eastern Zambia. A private photographic concession offered night game drives using powerful spotlights, led by a senior guide licensed under the Zambia Wildlife Authority. Sarah Beth Quillen was a 27-year-old freelance wildlife photographer from Bristol, England, who had been shooting professionally for just under 3 years. She had built a growing portfolio of African predator work and had recently signed with a mid-tier nature photography agency, placing her images in editorial publications. The assignments were becoming more demanding. The agency wanted shots that stood out, the kind of proximity and intimacy that required pushing past standard observation distances. Quillen had internalized that pressure. She had not yet accumulated enough experience to understand where the line was. On at least 2 previous drives at other concessions, she had stepped off vehicles briefly to reposition, both times in daylight, both times with guides who had either not noticed or not objected forcefully enough to stop her. Nothing had happened. The behavior had become normalized. The night drive departed at 6:45 p.m. with 4 passengers. The vehicle was an open Land Cruiser with low side panels, standard for Luangwa photographic concessions, designed to maximize visibility rather than contain passengers. The driver emphasized that exiting was absolutely prohibited. The vehicle located a leopard 90 minutes into the drive. The large male was feeding on an impala carcass 40 yards from the track. The spotlight operator angled the beam to the side to avoid spooking the animal. In the indirect light, the leopard was visible in profile, jaw working through the carcass, eyes occasionally catching the edge of the beam. Quillen immediately requested repositioning for a better angle. The driver explained that movement would likely cause the leopard to abandon the kill. Quillen pushed back. The driver held his position. Over the next 20 minutes, Quillen grew increasingly frustrated. When the driver refused a final request to reposition, she announced she would step out briefly. He prohibited it immediately, and other passengers urged her to stay. Without further discussion, Quillen swung her legs over the low side panel on the far side of the vehicle and dropped to the ground with her camera before anyone could intervene. She moved quickly toward the leopard, staying low. Leopards are among Africa's most adaptable and least predictable predators, with large males weighing up to 170 pounds and possessing strength disproportionate to their size. These solitary animals are intensely territorial around kills, and when an escape route is blocked, they do not retreat, they attack. The charge is typically explosive and immediate, targeting the head, face, or neck. Unlike lions, leopards often disengage after delivering severe trauma, particularly when noise and light are present. The leopard had stopped feeding the moment Quillen's silhouette appeared outside the vehicle. It rose from the carcass and faced her. She continued to close, angling toward the carcass but drifting into the space between the leopard and the nearest tree cover. At roughly 15 yards, the leopard's escape route was gone. It charged. The distance closed in under 2 seconds. The leopard struck her with enough force to knock her off her feet, slashing across her face and upper body as she went down. Its jaws drove into her neck. The driver swung the spotlight onto the attack and gunned the engine forward while firing a shot into the ground beside the animal. The leopard held for a moment before the combination of the vehicles' advance, the spotlight at close range, and a second ground shot caused it to release and bolt into the darkness, abandoning the kill entirely. The driver reached Quillen within moments. The wounds to her neck and face were severe. Deep lacerations across her scalp, cheek, and jaw, and a penetrating bite to the lateral neck that had damaged but not fully severed the external jugular. She was conscious but in shock, breathing in shallow gasps. The driver applied direct pressure and radioed for emergency evacuation. The concession's emergency vehicle reached the scene within approximately 55 minutes. Quillen was stabilized, transported by road to the nearest clinic, then airlifted to a hospital in Lusaka. She arrived in surgery approximately 5 hours after the attack. The initial vascular repair was completed without complication. However, on post-operative day 5, Quillen developed severe septic shock. The deep tissue wounds had been heavily contaminated. Leopard mouths carry a complex polymicrobial load, and this animal had been feeding on a partially decomposed carcass, compounding the bacterial burden dramatically. The infection proved aggressive and resistant to initial coverage. Her condition deteriorated rapidly despite aggressive treatment and repeated debridement. She died in the ICU 8 days after the attack. The inquiry confirmed she had exited against instructions and positioned herself between a feeding leopard and its cover. No criminal negligence was found. Quillen's family filed a civil claim, alleging inadequate radio communication and arguing the driver should have physically prevented her exit. The case was settled confidentially, without admission of liability. While Zambia's Nightbush had claimed a photographer who had not yet learned the limits of her own confidence, the quiet channels of Zimbabwe's lower Zambezi would soon show how little warning a river can give before it takes everything. It was November 3rd, 2016, and the dry season heat still held across Zimbabwe's Mana National Park, one of the few remaining wilderness areas where canoe safaris are permitted through genuinely wild river terrain. The Zambezi ran low and slow, its surface glassy in the late afternoon light, dotted with sandbanks and the dark shapes of wallowing hippos. Elephants moved along the far bank in silhouette. René Aubert was a 36-year-old travel writer from Lyon, France, whose work appeared in several European adventure publications. Aubert had been commissioned to produce a long-form piece on canoe safaris, the experience of navigating the Zambezi at water level, among the animals, without the insulation of a vehicle. It was the intimacy of the experience she had come to document. She had kayaked rivers in Europe and South America, and did not consider herself inexperienced on the water. The afternoon excursion launched at 3:15 p.m. with 3 guests, a licensed guide paddling lead, and a second guide at the rear. The briefing was thorough. Hippos were to be given a minimum of 50 meters. Pods were to be skirted wide. Under no circumstances were guests to paddle between a hippo and the nearest bank. The guides carried air horns. No guest was permitted to alter course independently. The group had been on the water for approximately an hour and 20 minutes when the lead guide raised his paddle to halt. A pod of 11 hippos occupied a wide bend roughly 80 meters ahead, clustered near the left bank. Several were submerged, their positions marked only by the slow rise of their backs and the occasional sweep of an ear. Others were visible at the waterline, jaws resting on the surface. The guide directed the group to hold while he assessed the channel to the right. Aubert, positioned in the middle canoe, had been photographing the pod. She later described in audio notes, recovered from her equipment, that she wanted a lower angle on the nearest hippo, which had surfaced and was facing the group. While the lead guide scanned the right channel and the rear guide steadied his canoe against a slow current, Aubert made several short forward strokes, closing perhaps 15 meters without alerting either guide. Common hippopotamuses are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, responsible for an estimated 500 or more human fatalities per year. more than any predator. Adult males weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds, with canine teeth exceeding 20 inches. They are acutely territorial in and around water, and a pod near a bank with submerged individuals represents one of the most dangerous configurations a river traveler can encounter. The animal's low profile underwater makes them nearly impossible to track. They surface without warning, and a canoe directly above a submerged hippo has almost no reaction time before contact. The nearest hippo submerged as Aubert moved forward. The rear guide saw her position and called out sharply. She paused and looked back. The canoe lifted from below. The impact came from below and slightly to the right, a bull surfacing beside and under the hull at speed, striking with enough force to send the canoe rolling hard to the left. Aubert was thrown clear and hit the water several feet away. The bull struck the overturned hull immediately, crushing it partially underwater before surfacing fully, mouth open, jaws spread wide, tusks exposed, then turning away from the wreckage. The rear guide was already paddling hard toward her. Aubert had surfaced, disoriented, treading water approximately 6 meters from the bull. The bull turned toward her movement. It made contact once, a single lateral strike with its head that drove her beneath the surface. The rear guide reached the site within seconds and thrust his paddle toward her. She caught it briefly before losing her grip. The bull moved off, rejoining the pod. The guides pulled her from the water within a minute. Aubert was conscious when they reached the bank, but the blow had caused severe internal injuries, suspected splenic rupture, and significant blunt trauma to the left thoracic cavity. She was lucid briefly, asking what had happened, before deteriorating rapidly. The guides stabilized her as best they could and activated their emergency beacon. The initial signal was not confirmed for nearly 20 minutes due to relay delays in the remote terrain. The evacuation aircraft faced further delay from crosswind conditions at the nearest airstrip. The aircraft reached the site 2 hours and 10 minutes after the incident. Attending medical personnel declared René Aubert deceased prior to loading. The post-mortem confirmed massive internal hemorrhage consistent with blunt force trauma from a large animal strike. Authority review found the guides had briefed properly and responded appropriately. Aubert had moved forward in violation of explicit instructions. No charges were filed. The operator initially contested the review's characterization of its spacing protocols, but accepted the findings and suspended operations for 30 days. The incident prompted safety reviews among several Zimbabwean canoe safari operators. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.